Fighting games had quite a bit of a heyday on the PS1 with landmark series like Tekken, Street Fighter and Guilty Gear getting really good releases on the system. I mean, come on, what self-respecting gamer in the PS1 era didn't own a copy of at least one of the Tekken games? Fighting games as a genre are games I don't really play anymore, kinda like multiplayer first-person shooters, as I just don't enjoy them like I used to. I think it's because you have way less time as an adult to just hang and play games. And I think that's why I fell out of love with these genres, because I just don't have any people that I'm trying to train myself to beat like I did in the old days. I remember playing Tekken 3 for hours just trying to improve so I could take my brother down and get that little smirk on his face that like git. But that doesn't mean I can't from time to time bust out the classics and get a good old hit of fighting game nostalgia. And that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to take a look at my PS1 fighting games. Let's start with Tobal No. 1. At least I think that's how you're supposed to say it. Is a fighting game made by the kings of RPGs, Square, and the creator of Dragon Ball Z, Akira Toriyama, designed the characters, and you can really tell when you look at them. They have that real Dragon Quest look to them. And that's definitely a real strength of this game, the imaginatively designed characters. When you look at the character selection screen, you just want to play as all the characters. The fighting feels quite similar to Virtual Fighter to me. It's a bit smoother than that, and there's definitely a lot of different throws you can pull off, and it seems quite in depth, and you can throw people out of the ring, which is kind of cool. Along with the usual modes you get in fighting games, you also get a quest mode in Tobal No. 1, which is kind of like a mix of a dungeon crawler and a brawler, and it kind of reminds me of Tekken Force mode, with you using the game's fighting mechanics but in a fully 3D dungeon. You have to navigate around these dungeons and fight enemies and collect items and food, and to be honest with you, it's a little bit clunky in retrospect, as everything feels like a bit of a hassle to do, but at the time of the game's release it felt fresh and interesting. The jump is something that takes a little bit of getting used to, as they expect you to do platforming, and with this game's engine it doesn't seem to handle it all that well. It always feels a little bit delayed. But it's definitely a cool idea that no other PS1 beat 'em up even tried, and it's interesting to play now as there's nothing else like it. The quest mode also acts as the way you unlock all the boss characters from the game, and they all appear as bosses on certain levels. I'll never forget my brother smashing a PlayStation because he got all the way up to the last boss and died. While not perfect, this is definitely a game worth checking out. There was also a sequel released, but it sadly never made its way to the UK, which is a shame because I would really like to try it. Maybe it's worth importing at some point. Soul Blade. This was a game I used to play anytime I was around my sister's house back when it was released, and I have some real fond memories of it. It was the first game in the Soul Calibur series, and it honestly is just as good as the ones that came after it. Instead of fighting with your hands like in most fighting games at the time, you fight like a gentleman with swords that for some reason don't turn you into a red puddle on the floor. Maybe they're painted bits of wood or something. And the fighting feels very slick to control, with you getting access to horizontal and vertical attacks and also some kicks. And it feels very fun to control, and an idiot like me who's terrible at fighting games can even have a good time just button mashing. The inclusion of guard impacts definitely adds a layer of strategy to the combat, as with good timing you can make it so your opponent can't even get a hit on you. And the fighting system was so perfect that it's pretty much remained unchanged in the series to this day. Sure, this game's only got your standard modes that you would get in most fighting games of the time, but that doesn't matter when the gameplay is this damn enjoyable. It's a game I'll often pop in when I have guests around because of how easy it is to pick up and play. And can I just say, the music is fucking killer. Just listen to this intro song.
Transcending history and the world, a tale of soul and swords, eternally retold.
God damn, that song is so fucking metal and awesome. It kind of reminds me of Tenga Cavalry. I swear they just literally got their sound from the song in this game. And for the time, it really looked amazing. And if you don't have this in your PS1 collection, what are you doing? Get it now. It's amazing. It's cheap. Get it. Now I'm going to run through all the Tekken games, because why not? They're all pretty damn awesome. Tekken 1. This is definitely the worst of the bunch. The controls feel slow, and getting your character back off the floor seems to take an eternity, and the graphics definitely aren't anything amazing, but it's a very early PS1 game, you can't really expect too much I suppose. I remember really loving it when I played it back in the day, as I didn't have the modern Tekkens to compare it to, and when you look at it through that lens of time, it's pretty damn good. A lot of the characters you know and love got their starts in this game, and the moves and combos still feel satisfying to pull off, but it's definitely not the first one you'll want to go back and play these days, much like Street Fighter 1. It's a good little bit of history, nothing much more than that. And that's okay, some games age better than others, that's just the nature of progress. Tekken 2. Now, I played a lot of this game growing up. That doesn't mean I'm good at it, I still suck at it like I do with all fighting games, but this was one of the first games my family used to play together. We'd get the PlayStation down in the living room and batter each other at this. I used to come home sometimes and find my mum and dad playing it in the living room. So needless to say, I have a lot of fond memories playing this game with my family, and there's certainly a lot of improvements over the first game. The fighting just feels a whole lot smoother and the graphics look a whole lot better, and some of the characters introduced in this game are some of my favourites. You can't go wrong with Lei and Beak, or Beck, however you say it, and Bruce. And it also introduced my favourite stupid characters to the game, like Roger the boxing kangaroo and Alex the boxing raptor. These characters are so ridiculous you can't help but love them. There's also some new modes added that weren't in the, quite frankly, bare bones first game. You get like a team battle survival mode and a time attack mode that certainly add a bit of variety to the gameplay. There's still a bit of delay when you're trying to get up off the floor. Again, I feel like this is just because I'm used to how much faster the new games are, and I'm sure I wouldn't have had this problem back in the day. Well, it's definitely not as good as Tekken 3, it still holds up quite well, and it's definitely got a place in my heart, though for a lot of nostalgia. Definitely a game worth playing these days. Tekken 3. Now, many would argue that this is the best fighting game on the PS1, and I would definitely probably agree with them. Tekken 3 took what made the other two games so great and just improved on it in every aspect. The graphics, quite honestly, still look pretty damn good today, and you could almost pass it for a PS2 game if you squinted a bit. And the fighting feels silky smooth, none of that taking 5 years to get up shit here. Even if you're a terrible casual button masher like me, you can have fun and feel like you're pulling off cool stuff, which is nice, and definitely part of why this game is so well remembered. It has a pretty good cast of characters, new and old, my favourite being Brian Fury, the badass android assassin dude, and the two most noob-friendly characters were introduced here, Eddie and Harang, forever giving the little brothers of the world a way to spam easy but deadly moves to annoy their older brothers. Sorry bro. There was also a lot of jokey characters like Dr. B, who was so old and feeble he couldn't even stand up straight. What a weird character. But even weirder still is the tiny dinosaur Gon, who from what I can gather is from a Japanese manga, and he's like the odd job of this game. He's so small you have to duck down to hit him. What a little bastard. I always thought that this was half of the fun of the older fighting games, figuring out how to unlock all the characters. They did this in the older Smash Bros. Games too, and it was always fun. I don't like the way the modern games don't do this anymore, but maybe I'm just old. Tekken 3 also introduced quite a lot of cool little side modes for you to play. Tekken Force mode, which is essentially Streets of Rage but with the Tekken engine, with you fighting your way through Hayachi's grunts and picking up food. It's kind of a little bit clunky now, and sometimes they can strike you from off the screen and you can't hit them, which is kind of annoying, but you know, it's fun all the same, and it was quite a lot of fun back when it was released. And the much loved beach ball mode, where you have to murder each other with a beach ball rather than your fist, which is always a good laugh. I still think to this day that it's the best game in the series, with the only other contender for me being Tekken Tag Tournament, which has a bigger roster and a bowling mode, but I'd probably go for this game for nostalgia reasons. Zero Divide. This is a game I will freely admit I used to love when I was younger, as it was basically a 3D version of Rise of the Robots, another awful game that my retarded child brain loved, because it had cool graphics and monstrous robots killing each other, and when I was little, that's all I needed out of a game. But like Rise of the Robots, Zero Divide, looking back on it, isn't the best game, with even for the time average graphics and slow, unresponsive controls, but there is some merit to my younger self's views on the game, because to be quite honest with you, the character designs are actually pretty cool, and even with the mediocre graphics, they look pretty damn awesome. It's a shame that the gameplay is very lackluster, and it just kind of feels like a robot version of Virtual Fighter, but not as good as that. It has the usual modes you would expect of a game of this era, with the arcade mode and versus mode. There's some cool little things about the fighting system, like there being limb damage, like something you get in a wrestling game, and if a limb gets damaged too much, it'll be useless in combat. And also, unlike games like Soul Blade and Virtual Fighter, you can hang on to the side of the arena to stop yourself from getting ringed out, which is nice. But the movesets just feel far too small. It just feels like you're stuck with barely any attacks to use. And like in the early Tekkens, you have that problem where getting up from the ground takes an eternity no matter how much you hit the buttons. But time ultimately hasn't been particularly kind to this interesting game, and it's definitely a middle-of-the-road PS1 fighting game. Not awful, but not amazing either. But some of the music does sound like 80s era Rush. Look at the Zero Divide music over Rush and try to tell me it doesn't fit. You won't be able to, because it does. Zero Divide 2. Believe it or not, Zero Divide actually got a sequel, and believe it or not again, it actually became a trilogy in Japan only, with a third game exclusive to the Sega Saturn. Maybe there was just loads of kids in Japan that wanted games starring robots killing each other, like me. That would explain why Robot Wars was so popular.
The peace has been shattered, diplomacy failed, the robots are back! It's all-out war and the battle lines have been drawn, so prime your weapons and evict the faint-hearted as we put the scrap back into metal!
I personally think that the real reason Robot Wars was so popular is because it had Craig Charles in it. What a legend. But enough about that. Zero Divide 2 in many ways is everything a sequel should be. It took what the first game did and improved on it, and while I have some nostalgia for the first game, I'll freely admit that it's pretty bad. But Zero Divide 2 is definitely a lot better. The fighting feels a lot more responsive and overall a lot more enjoyable than its predecessor. The movesets definitely feel a lot less restrictive, which was a major problem in the first game. There's also a few extra added modes, along with the usual arcade mode and versus mode. You get a time attack mode, a training mode, and that's it. I mean, it's better than nothing. I thought this option here that says story would be a story mode, but it's just like a 90s anime looking setup for the backstory of the game, complete with a 90s anime wooden narrator that kind of does voiceovers like me. I feel like the graphics in the arenas are much improved, the polygons look a lot smoother and the character models look a lot clearer, and the backgrounds in arenas look really nice for the time. And the annoyance of getting up at the speed of a pensioner's erection have now been remedied, and it doesn't take a full 5 years to get up anymore, which definitely helps the flow of combat, and the general movement just feels a whole lot smoother. And it just makes you want to keep playing it, and with the first one I just wanted to get the footage I needed and get out, but with this one I played it way longer than I needed to, and the music still sounds like 80s keyboard ridden rush, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wish I'd played this one back in the day instead of the original growing up, because this is a lot better, and dare I say it, a hidden gem? Now, let's talk about Street Fighter games, the daddy of all beat-em-up series, and there's definitely a few really good ones on the PS1. Let's start with Pocket Fighter. This is essentially the cute chibi version of Street Fighter. Oh, look at them, so cute, so kawaii. And it might actually be one of my favourite Street Fighter games. Well, technically it's not all Street Fighter, as you get a few characters from the Darkstalker games thrown in for good measure, but it's basically a Street Fighter game. It's actually based on the Puzzle Fighter series of games by Capcom that was unsurprisingly a puzzle game with some Street Fighter characters thrown in. And they incorporate some elements from that game, like obviously the graphic style, but you also beat gems out of your opponents like you do in Puzzle Fighter, and you use these gems to power up your special moves. It feels a lot more fast paced and fun than your average Street Fighter game, as it relies a lot more on combos than the older Street Fighter games, and it's a little bit more noob friendly, I'd say. And they go all the way with the animation and make it as over the top and cartoonish as the art style itself, with your characters constantly donning different outfits while they do combos and attacks, which is pretty cute. And the levels look gorgeous and just have tons going on in them. My favourite has to be this level. What the fuck is going on here?
Welcome to intermission.
And I'm endlessly entertained by the sight of a tiny chibi M. Bison having the time of his life, sliding around on a little sled with this look on his face. He's so happy. It just cracks me up every time I see it. This man is the head of a terrorist organisation. Imagine Osama bin Laden fucking going around on a sled with the happiest look on his face. But come on, look at him. He's so adorable. That's why this game is so great. Street Fighter X Plus Alpha. Got a fucking confusing name. Is the Street Fighter franchise's first foray into the fully 3D plane, and it mostly succeeds in capturing the fun, frantic gameplay of its 2D counterparts. I think the graphics still hold up and look quite nice now. It plays pretty much identically to the Street Fighter Alpha games, with special meters and super combos, and the only real difference being it's in 3D. But it really goes out of its way to have some cool character designs. There's so many badass looking characters in this game. Garuda, the mask wearing, knife toting dude. God, why do I always like the characters that wear masks or that are monsters? I don't know, that probably says something about me. Skullomania, the Spider-Man ass looking acrobat. Doctrine Dark, the weird half Darth Vader, half Niles Crane looking dude who chucks bombs everywhere and is an annoying cunt. Those ones are my favourites though. I really wish they'd bring some of these guys back in the new Street Fighter games. Not that I play the new ones, because I'd get absolutely destroyed if I went online. It, much like Marvel vs. Capcom and Pocket Fighters, feels like it relies a lot more on combos, with you being able to string together total annihilation on your opponents if you know what you're doing. Which, as you can tell from the footage, I clearly do not know what I'm doing, but yeah, Street Fighter's first foray into the 3D world is pretty damn good. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter is the start of a long-running Marvel vs. Capcom series that's still going to this day, and this original is still a hell of a game to play now. fast-paced with a good array of characters to choose from. Sure, it's not as good as the sequel, which had a better selection of characters, but hindsight is 2020, and I'm not paying the ridiculous amount of money that a copy of Marvel vs. Capcom goes for these days. I knew I shouldn't have lent my copy of Marvel vs. Capcom to my brother back in the day. I knew that fucker would break it. God damn it, Scott! It's a good game that pretty much does everything all the other Street Fighter games I've mentioned do, but there's one area where this game is superior to all the others, and that is the fact that it has the only viable competitive character. You know what I'm talking about, motherfucking Dan. You can't make up beauty like this. Guilty Gear is a game series that I fucking love. It's got style and a fucking awesome cheesy heavy metal soundtrack, and it's fast as hell, crazy gameplay is so fun to look at, and every time I play these games after about 5 minutes I'm going, fuck, my hand hurts! Maybe I'm just a lily-livered sissy boy, but I can't play these games for too long. The fighting in the game is of course very reminiscent of Street Fighter, like most 2D fighting games, but the added layer of being able to juggle and combo your opponents into oblivion is a lovely bonus. It's very much like the Killer Instinct series in that respect. It's a game that certainly has some interesting character designs, my favourite being the creepy bald head who goes around on a giant scalpel like a crowd at a Scar show. He perfectly sums up this game's wacky appeal. It's a game series that many hail as one of the best series around, and for good reason, because they're fun games. Cardinal Syn. God, what was it with games in the 90s and spelling words wrong on purpose? Illiteracy obviously was very hip and happening in the 90s apparently. Well, I'm gonna be honest, when I bought this game I had no idea what it was gonna be. I took one look at the cover and instantly thought, bog standard Mortal Kombat clone maybe? And I couldn't have been more wrong. This is legitimately a PS1 fighting game hidden gem. Instead of being a clone of Mortal Kombat, this is actually quite a well done clone of Soul Calibur. All the characters fight in a 3D plane with different types of weapons. While the controls can feel a little bit stiff, it's actually a fucking blast when you get used to it. It has a few spins on the Soul Calibur formula. This game adds in different environmental hazards and different items that you can pick up on the map, which adds a different layer of strategy. Sure, you can basically deplete everyone's health by just spamming ground moves on them when they're floored, but if they didn't want me to do that, they shouldn't have fell on the floor, should they? And to the game's credit, I'm sure you'd be pretty fucked in a real fight if you fell over. This game has some pretty damn cool character designs. It almost feels like it's pandering to me. Pretty much every character is a monster. Monsters are cool. My favourite has got to be this zombie called Plague. Look at his cute little dance he does when he's slaying his enemies. So cute! This, while not a perfect game, is a really fun fighter that I've never heard anyone mention, and I think it deserves a bit of attention. This could really be a fun game to play with a mate and a few beers. And at the end of the day, isn't that what fighting games are all about? Well, that's that then. God damn, the PS1 had some bloody great fighting games. It really was the golden age for the genre. What were some of the games you think I missed that should have been in here? I'll check out any suggestions and chuck them on the list for the second one if I choose to do one at some point. Anyway, thanks for watching and I will see you later.